Well, thank you all for being here and taking the time to take a course like this. It's sort of my life's work is entrepreneurship, engineering, climate change. So it's great to be here, and I appreciate being invited. So what I thought I would do today is just talk to you about DBL and Cleantech investing and all that it represents and sort of past, present, and future. I did get some great questions from folks I wasn't able to look at until this morning, and I've tried to incorporate answers into my remarks, but if I don't answer them, we can do that at the end. But please feel free to interrupt me at any time with a question as you hear about kind of what this is, the way we look at Cleantech, because it's fine with me to have an interactive session. And so just for those of you that don't know about DBL, we spun out of JPMorgan in 2008, and where I had worked for many, many years as a venture capitalist. And the DBL stands for double bottom line. We invest for both top-tier financial returns as well as driving social, economic, and environmental improvement. And we think that you can do both, and that you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. And that is what we've done now for over 12 years. We were kind of impact investors before that term was widely known. And we're kind of considered one of the pioneers. And we take a pretty broad definition. One of your questions someone wrote to me was, is it about the communities? Is it about the workforce having a good job, good conditions? Is it about the product actually helping society? And the answer to that is really all of the above. In a portfolio, you can accomplish all of that. You can have a company like Tesla that's, of course, from listening to Mark last week, is developing a product that helps move our planet away from fossil fuel, but it also helps create jobs in Fremont in a place where when the NUMMI plant that it took over had been shuttered, that was 5,000 jobs that were lost several years ago. So across our portfolio of investments, we have great products that are going to change the world for the better. We have wonderful workplace practices, which I'll tell you a little bit about, and we have community impact, as well as policy leadership. I always say that you can't really be an impact investor if you're afraid of policy, afraid of jumping in, because it's just vital to making all of this work. And so we spend a lot of time on that. Last week, one of my partners spent the day at the California Public Utilities Commission, which I don't know, in San Francisco, because net metering is sort of another question from one of you, is a big issue right now. And if you ever told me that one of my colleagues would be sitting in the PUC auditorium all day as part of being a venture capitalist, I'm not sure I would have predicted that. But it's the kind of stuff we do, and I'll tell you why. So when we started DBL, we didn't know how big and kind of how bold impact investing, clean tech investing was to become. And just to give you an example, when we wrote the investment memo for Tesla way back in 2006, we kind of, in every investment memo you say, oh, it'll be able to go public. Obviously that's our job is to get exits like that. And I don't know if Mark told you what the Model S used to be called. It was the White Star. That was its code name. And so I read the investment memo a few weeks ago, and we just said, well, if they make the White Star, we think that'll be a big enough product so that they'll be able to go public, and we'll make our returns, and that will be great. Our downside scenario, which you always have to put in an investment memo, was, remember they had the Roadster, which was the two-seater. And we said, well, if that's all they ever get around to making, if the White Star really doesn't happen, and the Roadster was called the Dark Star. So we said, well, even then, they could get acquired by like a luxury car manufacturer like Lamborghini or Ferrari that wanted to have a product for the the eco-minded luxury car consumer. And so we thought, well, we wouldn't make a lot of money then, but at least we wouldn't lose everything. And so that was kind of what our investment memo predicted. We didn't believe that downside scenario. You know, you never do, or else why would you make the investment? But we thought we were covered. We took a lot of flack for investing in Tesla from our colleagues because Silicon Valley, doesn't invest in car companies, and certainly didn't back then. And so it was, it wasn't the most comfortable feeling to be questioned by all of my peers. But we had this mission. Climate change was at the center of what we wanted to invest around. So we went ahead and did that. And of course today, 12 years later, Tesla is worth about $35 billion. It's about half the market capitalization of GM, which was founded 108 years ago. So Tesla, which is about 10 years old, is already half as valuable as GM. So that tells you something. So anyway, that's Tesla and that's GM. And that's a pretty amazing statistic. So before I talk about the SolarCity side of it, so very similarly, before SolarCity was founded in 2006, we had invested in a company called, the year before, a company called Powerlite, which is what at the time was one of the largest commercial installers. They put the solar on the Moscone Center, for example, a very long time ago. And I just remember after making that investment, a partner at a very storied venture firm took me out to dinner at the Woodside pub and just kind of said, Nancy, that Powerlite, that's kind of a construction company. That's not what venture capitalists really invest in. Go back. I had done a lot of life science and IT investing. He said, go back to that because this is not really what we're all about. And if you do have to invest in clean tech, get something that has something proprietary, like some really fancy technology, and not just a bunch of people putting solar panels on rooftops. And so, of course, that was somewhat jarring to me, and I made the case for, well, we did need to clean up our electricity grid if we were going to deal with climate change, and that should be a big business opportunity because it's a multi-billion-dollar market. But anyway, there was still a feeling that this was not really what we were paid to do. Well, so then 18 months after that dinner, Powerlite was sold to SunPower, one of the giants in the solar industry, for $345 million. And we held that investment for less than 2 years. So it was a really good financial return. And it was one of the first big clean tech VC exits. So that win gave us the confidence to invest in SolarCity, which we thought of as kind of just a residential version of Powerlite. I mean, they were both putting panels on rooftops. One was for commercial buildings, and SolarCity was destined for mostly residences at that time. And again, lots of skepticism, but today SolarCity, as you see here, is a $4 billion public company. It's a quarter the size of one of its kind of competitors, one of the incumbents, PG&E, which is in turn one of the largest investor-owned utilities in our country. And again, it was founded, coming up on its 10th anniversary, whereas PG&E was started a few years earlier even than General Motors. So this really shows you that we're in the middle of this very, very kind of once-in-a-generation change, and that the icons of the 20th century are eventually going to go away or be modified in the way that we look at them and replaced with icons of our own century. And that's pretty exciting. So today, I just want to give you a few statistics on the solar industry that surprised some folks. The solar industry employs more than the coal industry does, even though you hear how important coal is to this country. Solar has more employees, 174,000 last year. That's more than Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Salesforce combined. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. Of course, we love all those companies and very important to all of us, but they don't hire that many people. And that's something that the clean tech industry has kind of an ace in its hand, that it does employ people. When you make stuff, when you install stuff, you actually get more numbers. So that the solar industry employs roughly about the same number of people as Amazon as a company, which you know is one of the largest tech companies out there. It also employs more than the utility industry. Solar City, just in California, there are 55,000 solar workers, and that's more than all of the big 5 utilities in California combined. So PG&E, SoCalEd, Sempra, LADWP, and it's probably SMUD. They don't have as many employees as the solar industry. So that's, again, tells you something pretty important because, because when you combine that with got a jobs chart here somewhere. So sorry, these are out of order. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, I don't, this one I can just talk you through. When combined with wind and EV workforces, and the Tesla employs, did Mark tell you, probably about 13,000 people, the clean tech industry has added a whole new face to the emerging 21st century workforce. At Solar City, for example, 20% of the employees there are Latino. That is a statistic the tech world is not likely to meet anytime soon, and really is a limitation of the electronics kind of based industry, because these job numbers mean what they always mean, that the industry is gaining political clout as well as popular recognition. Because anytime you create jobs, you automatically have a little bit of a halo over your head, and you have more political capital. And whole regions are being transformed by these industries as they build plants to build capacity, like Fremont, like Reno for the Gigafactory. Solar City's building a gigawatt scale plant in Buffalo, which is historically has had quite a low employment rate. So this is going to change the way that we think of the American workforce over time. So those are some of the good indicators. We all remember the Solyndra period. I'm sure you've talked about that, where clean tech became a dirty word. The politics of moving from fossil-based economy to a clean energy economy really got nasty. And one of our companies, BrightSource Energy, which makes large-scale solar thermal plants, tried to go public during that time and failed. I mean, absolutely no one was interested. And even when Solar City went public, and you saw that it's a $4 billion company today, the price that we were able to get on that IPO was so low that instead of kind of jumping up and down when the opening bell rang, we winced. We thought, wow, people are getting a real bargain here. So it all worked out, but it was a very difficult time. At the same time as we felt that under pressure, we had a feeling, we knew that as the rest of the world began to understand what amazing companies these were, and the number and quality of the jobs, the ability to provide consumers with choice around their energy platform, and the ability to transform our economy from 20th century needs to 21st century needs, we knew that there would be no stopping this. We thought that companies were not just offering an electric car or a solar panel or an inverter to the customer. They were offering the customer a no-sacrifice ticket to the future. No sacrifice on quality, no sacrifice on sustainability, and that was going to be very potent. So along the way, as a venture capitalist, I've learned a few things during the ups and the downs of this first investing cycle. And that really is that when people tell you, you're crazy, you're nuts, this is stupid, why are you doing that you're probably onto something, and that you need to kind of assert yourself and find the strength to keep going on, even though you've got a lot of naysayers. And it doesn't mean that every deal you do or every job you have or business you join or create is going to be a Tesla or a Powerlite or a Solar City. But what I've learned is if you stay true to your vision and you work with like-minded folks and adapt as you need to, you'll achieve your goal sooner or later, even if it's not quite the goal you started out with. So that's kind of the journey that we've had over the past 10 years. And so what does all that mean? What does it all signify? So it means that if you are in school contemplating working in this field, you just need to remember it's bigger than any of us ever thought or think now. It means that the stakes are higher, the resistance is way stronger, but the potential for reward, both financial and social, is at a scale we never anticipated 10 years ago. And of course, there will be policy battles, incumbent tensions with the utilities and such, and even legal actions. There always are for a while until things settle down. And I just want to kind of prove that point. I want to take an example from another company, not a Cleantech company in our portfolio, which is Pandora, the digital music company. That was a company that had its near-death moments at the same time that the investment tax credit was not being extended. So 2007, 2008, which if the ITC had not been extended, none of the story would have ever happened. Solar City and Powerlite, that they all depended on that back then. But so Pandora had a challenge back then because the record label industry did not want digital music to succeed, and so they insisted on having royalties so high for the music that was played on internet radio that it would have put every internet music company out of business. And so you can imagine that year in our investment committee meetings where on the one hand, Solar City was in danger of failing because there was no investment tax credit renewal, and Pandora was about to go down the tubes because of a royalty dispute. And for Pandora, it had to be an act of Congress. That was the only way to solve that problem. And so that's a pretty high bar when you have an investment in a fledgling company. So what happened, without going into the details, a compromise was reached, and really now there's no turning back. Last November, more music was streamed than it was downloaded for the first time, and that's not going to change. I mean, you'll have new entrants, you'll have changes to the players, but we're not going back to just downloading, and we're certainly not going back to just terrestrial radio. So those lines are not going to uncross going forward. And so in Cleantech, it's very similar. No matter how turbulent today may seem, going forward, we're really approaching that inflection point where there is no turning back, where we feel that there's an inexorable shift toward a cleaner, more distributed, and more integrated electricity system. And that becomes not alternative, it becomes the preferred path. In fact, we may have reached this inflection point already, but as with most inflection points, you don't really know you're in them until you look back. But just a few facts that you may have heard in other classes, just to show you how things are changing. For example, this summer in August, 100% of new generation capacity in the US came from renewables. For the first 6 months of this year, just about 60% of all new generation capacity built in our country was from renewables. So, I mean, those are very important numbers. And globally, renewables represented approximately 59% of net additions to global power capacity as well. The impact of these trends is very, very significant. For as many coal plants and some nuclear plants closed, and today we just learned that the Pilgrim nuclear plant I think it's in Plymouth, Massachusetts, that's closing. As these big plants close, as natural gas continues to be volatile, over the next 10 to 20 years, renewables will represent the dominant energy sources in many places in the world and in the country. So this just shows you renewables growth as a percentage of new generation, and there's the green is solar, the blue is wind, and the dotted line is the two together. And so those are those are pretty stunning trends that will just intensify over time. And then the next slide shows you just the 17% of our coal generation capacity is being retired over the next few years due to new EPA rules, and that's going to go up, not down. This is.
That's your next one. This might be easier to read here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is just showing you the various sources of new generation, which we talked about, but just for your files. And then the next, there's the job slide. Sorry about that. But just to show you, look at Tesla, look at Twitter, look at Solar City. This is pretty counterintuitive. Most people don't realize just that job creation engine. And then, of course, why is all of this? Why are we seeing more numbers, increasing numbers for wind and solar? Well, it's because of cost curves like these that are coming down in both wind and solar. So we're kind of living this day to day, so perhaps some of you are too. From where I sit, having participated in some of these world-changing innovations, I look forward and see that a whole nother generation of innovation is on its way. I see an investment trends away from fossil fuels toward clean energy. Back in 2014, I gave a talk to a group that represented a lot of the nation's endowment officers for universities, and I gave them like an hour lecture about how the divest reinvest movement, it wasn't really about all the students demonstrating outside your door. It's about investing in innovation, and that you need to move from one cycle to the other in order to make money for your institution. It's like, imagine if you had held on to all your mainframe computer stocks when the mini computer and the desktop and then finally Apple portable personal computers were built. I mean, you would have lost a lot of money hanging onto those kind of dinosaurs, and you might have been fired. So I made a whole speech that really showed that you can't do that in other sectors, and you shouldn't do it in electricity and energy either, because you're going to face the same peril. And so we do. And fast forward to today. I mean, when I made that speech, I think there was only less than 50 million divested, and today it stands at 2.6 trillion. So that's a movement that a lot of people poo-pooed, and yet extremely fast growing in terms of the numbers. So changes in popular sentiment, changes in investment paradigms are propelling the next generation of startups that are built on the backs of the first generation that we've talked about, and pushing us even further into a clean energy future. So I want to just talk briefly about 5 of the areas that we're excited about and how they fit into this inflection point I was talking about. So storage and new age microgrids. There should be a new international markets, big data, space age, and circular economy are kind of 5 of our themes. So energy storage and new age microgrids, really this is not your grandfather's or your county hospital microgrid where you just have a bunch of generators in case the electricity goes off and you need to make sure the hospital's still running. These are microgrids that are very sophisticated, incorporate demand response, solar, storage, so that you can take your power from the grid when you need it and when it's cheap, or you can take it from your battery when that's cheapest, or you can take it from your solar when that's firing on all cylinders. And the utility will help you make these decisions. There's sophisticated software to turn things on and off, and in a way that builds grid strength. And that automatically saves you money in terms of your electricity bill. So it's a very compelling financial equation, as well as good for the environment. There was one of our companies, Advanced Microgrid Solutions, that makes these microgrids, just had an announcement yesterday where the Irvine company, it's the largest, one of the largest leading land companies in our country, down in Southern California, they're putting a bunch of their office parks on a microgrid where they're going to have Tesla batteries, they're going to have solar, and then they're going to have the grid, and they're going to have the software, and they're just going to get the power from wherever it makes sense, and they're going to, the Irvine Land Company projects that it will reduce its power bill by about 25%. So these are here and now. They're doing 10 megawatts, and then they're going to do 40 more over the next few years. So it's not demos, it's not pilots. You know, this is really something that's here to stay, because storage allows you to what you couldn't do before. You always had to build peakers to deal with the hottest days of the year where everyone had their air condition on. But now you don't have to do that, because you can store energy. Another theme that and this just shows you where some of the leading kind of new age microgrid projects are. International. There are over 1 billion people on our planet that don't have electricity. It's kind of hard to imagine in this day and age, but many of the world's poor just do not have access to electricity, and then a whole nother group has access to very intermittent electricity. Many places in the developing world, electricity goes off several times a week. So what do you do there? There have been a lot of NGOs, a lot of not-for-profits that have, brought solar lanterns to Africa, and that's all been very encouraging. But in order to scale, to take on 1 billion people, you need to invest. You need to have companies. Even the Gates Foundation doesn't have enough money to write a grant where they're going to be able to power a whole continent, forever. So you need the private sector to come in and build on what the NGOs have built there, and the benefit is not just that you can do it now at the same price as a kerosene lamp, for example, but you also avoid a huge health risk, because kerosene is a very unhealthy product to have in your school or your house. And so we're going to announce, there's a big White House conference next week, which we didn't know about, but it's on off-grid, how to get power to off-grid folks, and you can turn it. We're going to, this is the company that we're going to announce we've invested in. It's up in San Francisco. It's called OffGrid Electric. And they are serving Tanzania as the first country, and they're the largest, really, company working in Tanzania, and then they plan to move to other countries. And we learned about it because Solar City, one of our investments and where I'm on the board, they thought it was such an interesting company that they invested in it a few years ago as a strategic way to learn what was going on in the developing world. And then they needed a new round of investment, and they came to us. So for us, this is a big deal, because we've never invested. We're just domestic. This is the first time we've invested in an African company. So we're very excited about that. And again, it's a huge opportunity. Another opportunity is just the ability of big data, to apply to ag and food. A lot of activity here. Drones, big data analysis, mobile web, really allowing farmers to get information about their own county and what seeds are working, where people, how are yields when people water less or water more, or use who uses less energy, who uses more? Does that have any correlation to crop output? And so that is something that you couldn't really know before, because you couldn't collect that information and crunch it without being very tedious and expensive. So now that's cheap, it's easy. Farmers have iPads, they have monitors on their tractors. They've been collecting this information for decades, but they haven't done anything with it. And a lot of it has gone to the large corporations, who then use that information to sell their own products. Like it's in the interest of a seed company to say, oh, you should plant 30 seeds per row. Well, what if your data show you only need 20, and that after you plant 20, you get a suboptimal return on those additional 10? Well, that's what sometimes people are learning. And so to have that independent information is super important. So agriculture and natural resource companies will be transformed by the availability of cheap, high-quality data. Another area that we're very interested in is space. And you may ask, well, how is space related to climate change? Lots of ways. We take for granted that we can find out anything we want on our phones by hooking up to the internet. And that's cheap and it's easy and it's democratized. Everyone can do it that has a phone. Well, what if images of our planet were cheap enough and good enough and frequent enough so that you could find out, where is carbon moving throughout a region, or where are pollutants the most intense on a given 30-day period? Or if you're maybe not just climate change, if you're studying refugees, if you could see where they're moving on a day-to-day basis and just look that up on your phone, all of a sudden you have much better tools, much better information with which to solve whatever problem it is you're trying to solve. So we really feel that the tools that small satellites are being designed at a company called Planet Lab up in San Francisco, or better mapping tools, will allow future researchers and activists to get better data and make better decisions. We're an investor in SpaceX. We're kind of sold on Elon Musk and his approach to the world. So I guess I have to put this. And you may say, well, rockets are not necessarily a climate change investment. But if you look at what they're trying to do, every time you see them try to land that rocket on the pad in the ocean, that is ushering in, recycled rocket parts, which will make space travel a lot less resource heavy in the way that you build them, and allow you to reuse parts of the rocket, which has an environmental benefit. Which leads me to our last category, which is the circular economy. I mean, we do need to use less, repurpose, reuse, and it's the sharing economy, the circular economy, whatever you want to call it. That's a very dynamic field to invest in. And it can be recycling with microgrids helping to recycle wastewater and such. But it also has a very firm hold in the retail and in consumer markets. We've invested in a few. One is the Real, which is takes luxury goods and allows you to consign them online and authenticate that whatever you have a Chanel bag that you want to sell. It authenticates that it is real, and then you get 70% of whatever you consigned for. And these products, you don't have to buy new stuff. You just keep these products alive in the marketplace for many, many cycles. And this is a company that's growing at a very fast clip, just because people have kind of an aspirational need to. Not everybody, but a lot of people want to have nice things, but they don't want to buy them, and maybe they can't afford them new. And so this is a way to kind of democratize access and save the planet from kind of the onslaught of new goods all the time. And then Yurtle takes it one step further. That's another company we've invested in, where you're not even using cash. It's a sharing economy. You develop points so that if you have a friend that just had a baby who no longer needs to be in the crib and you don't need all that stuff, you just put it on Yurtle and someone will snatch it and not have to pay for it. So this is a really nice, as long as they've accumulated Yurtle points. So this is something that it helps a lower income demographic participate in the sharing economy. So these are just a few examples of areas that we think will generate both great investment returns and products and services that are healthy for the planet. You can see it's a very diverse list, and yet the threads are kind of tied together in a very distinctively 21st century way. Unlike sort of the 20th century knot, that it was centralized, command and control, monopolies, opacity, the 21st century knot is all about distributed energy, portable, it's secured by themes like choice, competition, and transparency. So you've got two very different styles between the last century and our own. It's a world where resource conservation, renewables, and storage combine with the power to choose any kind of energy footprint you want. Where clean, distributed energy allows the billion people in the world that don't have electricity to turn on the lights and more for the first time, and where it's a world where customers are members or partners or anything but passive ratepayers like our grandparents were, who were always on the receiving arm of a predetermined energy grid service, had no choice in that. So it's, as I mentioned, our world is a world where farmers join together. They can use their collective information to improve their crop yields and their livelihoods while preserving resources along the way. And where space-age tools for mapping and imaging become as accessible as listening to music on our smartphones. And finally, it's a world where consumers of all kinds can track and influence the supply chain of anything they buy and then keep the product that they've bought in the economy for other people to use instead of sending it into landfills. So just in closing kind of the formal remarks here, I would just say that as you study here at Stanford and you plan for your future, I think it's important to remember that you have the ability to do something here that's very permanent and very large, even though kind of the use of social media sometimes makes everything feel somewhat ephemeral. This field is anything but that. And if you choose, I hope you do, to jump into it in some way, you should think of yourselves as kind of being part of the founding fathers and mothers of the 21st century. And it's really up to us to learn from the people that have gone before us and to build on that, but to create a world that's not only livable, but is actually worth living in. And that's kind of the way that DBL is structured, and it's a future that we think is very much doable, and that working together, we can all do this. So I hope that's given you just a little bit of background of our approach to investing, of why we're so excited about being able to continue to invest in these entrepreneurs, and how you might think about your own lives and ways that you might participate. So with that, should we do Q&A here, or should I just?
Q&A, but before that, thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you. I have the questions here I can go through.
Yeah, so if you have questions that you didn't submit or that you feel are burning, you can ask them now, or Nancy has a whole list of what got sent.
So you started off by talking about how DBL split off from JPMorgan, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you think that, or I guess if you could just talk about the reason for splitting off rather than staying part of JPMorgan, if that was more instigated by the people who stayed there or the people who left, or it was sort of a mutual
Yeah.
Or if you think there's some sort of inherent conflict of interest between impact investing and traditional VC.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, certainly now you see Bain Capital and BlackRock and Goldman Sachs. I mean, everyone's kind of getting involved in it. But that, and I think that's in general a good thing. But back in 2008, it was not popular. And so what happened is that when Jamie Dimon became the new CEO of JPMorgan, he just decided he wanted to get rid of all the third-party owned funds. I mean, which means funds like ours, where we had pension funds, we had banks, we had foundations as investors. And he said, the only investing we do, I want to be using bank capital. I don't want the risk of people getting mad at us if we lose their money. So there were a lot of funds at JPMorgan, and so he just said, okay, we're going to spin all of you out. And so it took us about 1.5 years to negotiate how exactly that was going to happen. And we benefited because they didn't think our portfolio was very valuable. And at the time, it actually wasn't. I mean, we would tell them about Tesla, and we'd tell them about Solar City and all of these, Pandora, and they would like, yeah, those seem really risky, very California, and like, nice that you're doing it, Nancy, but why don't you do that on your own? So, And I resisted it at first. I mean, I didn't consider myself an entrepreneur at the time. I liked backing entrepreneurs, but I worked in the same place. Very, very unusual today, but I worked at a place that had been acquired. Hambrick & Quist was acquired by JPMorgan, right? So I worked at the same place for over 20 years, so I was very happy. But sometimes you got to kind of get kicked out of the house, and so that's what happened. And so in 2008, we spun out and never looked back. And of course, it was the right decision. I mean, immediately after doing it, even though it was the worst time to do it because the September downturn really was quite threatening to a lot of our portfolio companies and to us. But even with that downturn, we just felt we were able to express our mission in a way that we couldn't as part of a big international bank. And that was very liberating and powerful.
So you talked about companies being very California. So how do you address the parts of the country where power is cheap, cost of living is cheap, water is cheap, and they're not necessarily in the drought. Like here, we live with expensive water, expensive power. Agriculture is using all our water. So how can one start a company and deal with the naysayers about like, oh, it's only a California problem? Well,
I mean, there's a reason why California has more solar installed than any other state. So a lot of things start in California, but the way that you get around it being just a California industry, and we're seeing this, I mean, and it's not just a Western industry anymore. I mean, obviously Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and California have a lot of solar, but so do New Jersey and New York and Massachusetts. And the reason, there are a couple of things. In the early days, you started where electricity prices were high, and where there was some decent sun. And so that's why California is such a great place to grow the industry. But with each reduction in cost of solar, all of a sudden, if electricity is 13 cents a kilowatt hour instead of 20 cents as it was in California, all of a sudden you can sell into that state because the economics of your solar lease of your product, you can make money even though you're replacing a system where someone paid 13 cents. And so it's kind of like one of the reasons that solar's not big and rooftop solar's not big in Florida yet is because there's some pretty cheap fossil power there. And there's also a whole bunch of laws against the rooftop industry that would need to be changed. But it's just a matter of time as the costs of renewables continue to come down. Even if you don't care about climate change, you can make a very intelligent financial decision to switch to renewables because of the cost argument. So it's that classic innovation has to drive down cost in order to scale and then plow money back into R&D to drive down costs even further. And that's kind of the virtuous cycle we're in.
As you're beginning to do more impact investing in developing countries, what precautions are you taking to ensure you get your returns in places where the judicial system may not favor litigation if it comes to that, if they decide to edge out shareholders?
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time. In fact, we changed the governing. You know how a lot of corporations in our country have their corporate offices in Delaware because the tax laws are good there. So there's a kind of a parallel step that you take when you're investing in an international company. Make sure it's incorporated in a country that has somewhat beneficial laws. So I think we moved from the Seychelles to, I forget, some other country in the African region in order to protect ourselves more. I mean, there's no 100% protection, and we understand that once we invest, 100% of our capital is at risk of being lost. But then you do some political assessment and demographic assessment of these nations, and you figure out which ones are more amenable to households wanting to have electric lighting, and then which ones, it's just like the previous question, Tanzania is kind of the California of Africa, and then we'll go to other countries just as we go to other states, as laws, as prices, as political risk is evaluated, and kind of grow that way. Other questions?
What is your strategy for finding out about new things? Like probably now, a lot of things come to you, but in the days where you just had spun out, did you have to go out and just really kind of be on top of things, and how did you go about that?
Yes, it's in fact Leslie mentioned some of the places that we still hang out there, but we especially the Cleantech Open, the various conferences out there. It was part of our mission anyway. We wanted to educate people about climate change, but it was also a way to increase our deal flow, is to seek out conferences, business plan competitions, speaking at universities, Department of Energy gatherings. So that's been a big part of our way to enhance our deal flow. And then, of course, we get the referrals from our existing entrepreneurs, which is also a great way to do it. But right now, I would say, we went through a lull, as I described, in the cylinder period, but I would say I get 4 or 5 deals a day that just come in through email. So
What percentage can you actually act on?
It's so hard. Because I'm like one of those neurotic people. I try to respond to all emails like immediately. And that's really hard to do. But we have a team now. We have a system. We ask for an executive summary. We put it into our deal log. We have weekly meetings where we have new deals, working deals, and then portfolio companies. And so I'm making it sound like it all works very smoothly. It doesn't, but that's in principle how we manage that deal flow. And it works. It's just that I feel like we're constantly behind. So if you send me a business plan, I will get to it, but maybe not like immediately.
Do you have people at your company with very technical backgrounds, or is it primarily finance and you rely on the entrepreneurs to have technical knowledge and be honest about what their product does technically?
Well, an entrepreneur by definition is always going to be optimistic and
Right.
and
So you have pessimistic technical people that work for you.
yeah, well, we have some technical people, but you can't really have pessimistic people in our industry because, frankly, anything we look at it, you could say that is so not going to work. So you kind of have an optimistic outlook, and then be rigorous. So we have a mix. I went to Stanford. I was an anthropology major, so which I actually feel is quite useful because a lot of what we study, or a lot of what we're dealing with, are subcultures that are clashing, and so that was kind of what I learned about. But we have engineers. We have a mechanical engineer. We have an electric engineer. I actually did a lot in life sciences. I was a research assistant for the human bio program. That's still here, right? The sort of life science core. So, but then what you do is you build a network, just like you have a network of deals, you have a network of people that will help you analyze deals. And sometimes you even, if it's some super esoteric area, you actually pay someone, a consultant, to help you study a deal. So our business is so cottage. It's you just have to keep track of everyone that you meet, because you'll probably need to ask that person for something going forward, and then you give something to someone else. It kind of has to be a two-way street. But I like having both technical and people that are, I wouldn't say they're non-technical, but I have a much deeper understanding than one of the engineers on our team of how policy works and how politics works. And while that's not important in many deals, it's important in enough of them, and it's also something where we can help our companies. That those two, I would hate to miss one or the other. I think a diverse team is kind of preferable.
Well, policy can be an excellent ally as well as a stiff adversary. Can you share with us a few of the instances in which you felt your work or partnership with policy has been most productive?
Yes. We have a lot of good stories. In our early days, and still, we try to put companies when we can in lower income neighborhoods, because we believe, as part of our mission, is that if you put an entrepreneurial company that begins to succeed in a poor neighborhood, a lot of good things start to happen in terms of there's a tax base eventually. They're hiring people. Those people need lunch. They need dry cleaning. I mean, so you kind of lift a neighborhood out of poverty if all goes well. And so, and we track all that. We measure job creation. We look at zip codes. That's kind of part of our impact reporting, in addition to our financial reporting. And so when it came time to, for Tesla to site the Model S plant, which is now the old NUMMI plant in Fremont, it's hard to believe, but around that board table, a lot of the pressure was anywhere but America, and especially anywhere but California. It's like, let's go to Mexico, let's go to Asia, let's go to the South, where labor costs are low. And since our mission as a firm was to create more high quality jobs in Northern California, we had a really small mission, small fund in those early days. We were like, well, wait a second, maybe we could put that plant in Northern California and keep those jobs in California and in America. And so in order to make that compelling, we had to find some incentives. And this took years. And the NUMMI plant was like, we'd gone through 6 or 7 deals. But we got workforce training dollars, we got free rent, we got loans, because we had something to sell. We're going to bring you some workers. We're going to help this troubled neighborhood improve. And so big companies do that a lot. Economic development is a pretty well-known tool, but startup companies don't do it at all. I mean, they don't have the talent, they don't have the expertise, and so we kind of helped Tesla realize that they could get some policies that would make it level the playing field, and that's eventually how the NUMMI plant was found. And then Elon Musk. So we would never advocate that if it was contrary to the business, but it seemed to us, and then Elon became sort of more kind of determined about this fact. He was like, in those early days, you need to have manufacturing near R&D and near headquarters. You don't want to be jumping on a plane while you're doing a revision on a car, on a daily basis. And so we had that helped us. The business need to be close to San Carlos, which is where the company used to be before it moved to Palo Alto. That was a nice fit for us, and so together we kind of joined forces and made that happen. And I'll just tell you one thing we did last week, just to give you something current and new. So diversity is another one of our areas of mission, and we just want to help make the investment world look more like the demographics of our country, make Cleantech, make sure that we're representing, that we look like as diverse as our nation is. And so Solar City, which is one of you asked about net metering, and there's a big, tensions times 50. I mean, that's one of the nightmares of this industry, is that all the policy is at the state level. So it's like you do one thing in New York, and then you have to do something in New Jersey that's different. And so these companies spend an inordinate amount of time and money working these. And just to answer the question that someone had, the issue about net metering, it's not really a cost shift, which is what was reflected in the question. It's a revenue shift. It's basically every time you get a solar customer that net meters and sells power back to the grid, you're losing revenue if you're PG&E. And so you have to come up with some way to make up for that revenue by investing in other things. And a lot of utilities are starting to do that, like the storage, the Irvine Land Company thing. That was a SoCal Ed project. So again, I think all of this is going to sort itself out. But the thing that happens is that it isn't actually a cost shift, because there are a lot of benefits that the solar homes are adding to the grid. You don't have to build as many transmission lines. You don't have to upgrade your distribution system. So there's a lot of money saving that goes on. But the utilities often focus on, oh, you're using our grid and you're not paying for it. But it isn't exactly. That's not the kind of right way to look at it. But so anyway, at the CPUC last week, there was a meeting on net metering, and there was also a meeting of the diversity task force at the Public Utilities Commission, which, believe it or not, we were a beneficiary of, because we got an investment from a utility because they are pressured by the PUC to, even in financial services, which VC is, to make sure that they hire enough women, minorities, and veterans. And so, because our firm was women-led, we were able to qualify for that program. And so we've always kind of tried to give back and encourage the Public Utilities Commission to continue this program. So there were these two meetings going on, and Michael Picker, who's the president of the PUC, asked Lisa, one of my colleagues who was at the meeting, to get up and talk about about a firm and about a project that he knew we had just done. And what we had done is we had said to Solar City that, they do all of these tax equity funds and securitizing of the leases. It's a way to bring down the cost of capital. And so they securitize those solar assets. Usually it's like B of A, Credit Suisse, Goldman. I mean, it's Wall Street banks that do these securitizations. And so we had worked with Solar City to say, well, why don't we kind of do what the utilities are forced to do, but do it voluntarily, because it's kind of the right thing to do. Why don't we find a minority broker to include in our securitization that we did? We did this about a month ago. And Solar City said, hey, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And so we worked, and we found Juan Espinoza from Apto Partners, which is a Hispanic-owned broker in New Jersey. And he said, we found him on the CPUC, the Public Utility Commission, list of minority vendors. And so he said, yeah, oh, this is great. I'll join the securitization. And so we told that story when the president asked us to speak for, you have like 2 minutes. So she told a lot faster than I did. So all of a sudden, and everyone's nodding, and the commissioners are saying, oh, that's great. And meanwhile, Solar City is fighting this battle with the PUC to make rates, positive, to get net metering right. It's not a battle, but it's an extremely intense confrontation. And all of a sudden, they looked great in front of these very powerful regulators. And Picker said something like, wow, that's really great to see that the solar industry is leading on this. So it's that kind of political goodwill and for doing the right thing. I mean, that's not why Solar City did it, but you can see you derive benefits for fighting battles you really care about. So, and that was just something that, because we had been a beneficiary, we had the knowledge of a program that I think no one else in California knows about, that's a venture capitalist, and it's like way down in the weeds. But that's an example of how, when you have a broader version of what you're trying to accomplish, you reach out to more stakeholders that then can build you a platform that is more robust, is our belief.
I asked the question about the energy metering, and I have a follow-up. So I understand that deferring investment into the distribution grid is part of the appeal for a utility, but with solar, isn't that really significantly more valuable in a commercial-heavy sector where you have like the solar production peaks along with the consumption peak, whereas in a residential heavy area, you could actually have net energy production during the day on a high solar day, and because nobody's home to use the electricity, whereas then, so you need to feed it back out into the transmission lines during the day, and then when people get home at 5 to 7 p.m., you still have the issue with the evening peak.
Yeah, it's called the duck curve, where you have a sort of, the use goes way down, where the production goes up, and then it all comes together in the evening, and that's the duck's head. So the first thing to say is all of that goes away as storage becomes cheaper.
Sure.
So the long-term solution to all of this gnashing of teeth is storage. And that's something utilities can make money with, just as they can make money with electric vehicles. So that's why I'm kind of optimistic that we're just in this kind of period that's not going to last. However, since storage is not ubiquitous yet, you do have the issue where you don't have, obviously, you don't have solar power at night. And so all solar homes are using the grid. But what's happening is that still that while there may be there isn't actually more than we need usually on the grid during the day. And it's also cheaper, and you don't have to build as many additional plants because you're able to smooth out some of your needs with solar and wind. So it's still a benefit to the grid because it's just adding free, you're not paying for any kind of fuel, and and especially in especially like a day like this where there's a huge need for air conditioning in many regions in the state, then you're going to start using, you need as much as you can. So the studies that the various utility commissions have done across the country, they all come to the same conclusion, that it's kind of a wash. That yes, they do still use the grid, but they also do good things by selling back the solar. And so what's complicated is that the utilities make certain claims and the solar industry makes certain claims. And so it's hard to navigate what's actually true. And that's what the PUC is doing right now. They're studying this and they're going to come out with recommendations. Let's see, I can just go through a couple of these questions that you wrote to me. Someone asked, what percentage of our funded ventures have a social component? And I would say all of them. It's just that some of our deals do well and some don't. And so if the company fails or never grows to its full potential, it doesn't have as much social impact because you're not creating as many jobs and it's not able to change the world. How much is focused on climate change? I would say about 2/3 of our portfolio has some relation to climate. And that will probably stay constant.
Are you the highest percentage of any fund, do you think, in climate change?
Well, there's a company called Generation Investments, which is led, one of the leaders is Al Gore. It's in London, although they have a New York office. They don't have an office here. They do public stocks and private. And they do everything with a sustainability. They define it very broadly, but they're 100%. But most of what they do is not venture. It's public stocks. So I would say in terms of venture, we're probably the highest because we're larger than the few Cleantech only funds out there are quite small. And our last fund was $400 million. So we're kind of a big firm now. Someone asked about how do you invest in the larger startups versus the young ones, where the risk profiles are different, and is there oversaturation? And it's basically you just kind of use your portfolio theory. You make sure that you don't have 10 Teslas in your portfolio. That would have been a good thing, but it is very high risk, and so you need to make sure you've got some capital-intensive ones, you've got some capital-light ones that'll take forever, ones that hopefully will only take a few years, and kind of use diversification to make sure you're not overexposed. And so while we're not stage agnostic, we tend to invest earlier, we will do some later stage to kind of protect our returns, like Powerlite. That was kind of a later stage investment for us. Someone asked about the developing world, and I think I answered that with OGE. Sorry.
Are you finding that the average payback on climate change-focused companies is a lot longer, and that's why other VC firms aren't jumping in?
It's, I don't think there's been a study of it, so I only have anecdotal evidence. I mean, I think there is, some of our companies, it's hard the capital intense ones, or the ones with a heavy regulatory burden where, you know, you have to get a permit to do this, and then the California Energy Commission has to okay it, and the Department of Interior, those are longer ones, and those are frankly harder to make a lot of money on. I mean, not to say you can't make money, but they're just longer and tougher. And so, you know, we would severely limit the number of those we have in a portfolio. But having said that, I mean, Tesla, I think we invested at Tesla the same time as Pandora, and Tesla went public a year earlier. And we've also had some of our shortest holding periods be Cleantech companies. So I'm not, and then like Revolution Foods, you may have heard of that. It's a company that serves healthy lunches to low-income schools. It's kind of a poster child for an impact company because it addresses obesity and diabetes in our kids' health. It's in Oakland. They have a high valuation, but they've been around. I think they're going to come on their 10th year, and they're not going to go public for a few years. So it's hard. Someone should do an analysis. The problem is that during that period of Solyndra, there were so many kind of what we call tourists in the clean tech venture industry that kind of were in and out and didn't really represent the norm, that if you counted all of those, because there were a lot of failures, your data would be very skewed. So I think we have to have a little bit more of a normal period to kind of figure out what the true holding periods. Our own experience has been that they aren't longer. So. And someone asked, is the clean tech investing outlook improving? And I would say definitively, yes, definitely yes. I think that the kind of themes that I talked about, the fact that I get four or five deals a day, I mean, it's definitely percolating again, which is wonderful to see. Now, in terms of who's investing, the tourists are gone, but there are still some great firms that are committed, and then strategics and international and family offices. All of a sudden, those are some of our syndicate partners that didn't exist in the early days. So like anything, you know, if you work long enough, you attract a new group of investors in, and when others have been washed out. So that's what's happening. What will help increase the climate for funding? You know, it's basically more exits, more stories, more jobs, more icons. They don't have to all go public, but you know, you need to have a certain visibility of people having the venture model working. So that's what we're working for as well. So one of you was interested in how did I get sort of more of a personal career path, and how did I get involved in impact investing? You know, you only connect the dots in the rearview mirror. Nothing was connected as it was happening. But the day after I graduated from Stanford, I actually went to work. I took a plane to Washington, and I worked as an intern for the Sierra Club. And it's always been a passion of mine. And then my father was an engineer and he was a patent attorney, but he was an inventor. And so we were always deployed to help him manufacture various things that he had invented in our basement. And so I also had an appreciation for entrepreneurship. And so I think just along the way, I've tried to combine those. And sometimes that didn't work, and I did internet investing around the first .com wave. But you know, as you work and you generate enough of a network, you're able to stitch things together so that when the opportunity presents itself, then you can really identify what has been kind of germinating in your mind all along. And so that happened to me in 2001, where I was still very active in politics with our firm. I ran our government affairs, but I was doing internet investing, and then all of a sudden, the Bay Area Council came, which is a regional business group that focuses on the Bay Area staying strong for business. They came and said, all these neighborhood groups are complaining that during the .com boom, the same old neighborhoods in the Bay Area stayed poor, and that when Netscape or all these companies were formed, they're all in the same place. And so Richmond's still poor, Oakland's still poor, East Palo Alto back then was still poor. And so they said, we want to tell these neighborhood groups that we're going to work with the professional venture capitalists to put companies in poor neighborhoods. And that, I mean, I'm oversimplifying what our theme was, but that was pretty much it. And so that allowed, and so my boss said, well, Nancy, no one else wants to do that at H&Q, but it kind of combines your two jobs. You know, you're doing all this politics, you're doing investing, and so why don't you just take it, kind of mash up, kind of do one job instead of having two jobs. And so, you know, if you wait long enough, things like that happen and you're able to take advantage of them. And so I just jumped in, and it really did answer, I mean, I think venture capital of any flavor is a really fun, challenging and interesting job, but to overlay the social component and the environmental component, you know, it's not even a job, you know, it's like a calling. It's just very, very satisfying.
Thank you so
Oh, we're done?
Well, unless people have more questions.
Any last questions?
One question. If you were to embark on another spin-off, what would it be?
Actually, I have an idea, which is, and I know nothing about real estate investing. This is the sad part. But if I did, I would do a double bottom line a real estate investment firm, because 10 years ago, when we invested in Pandora, Revolution Foods is in Oakland, Bright Source is in Oakland, and now we have some companies in Hunters Point, and I can see like that's getting better. What if we had invested in the neighborhoods that we put our company or our companies were in, or we helped them move to, and helped develop anti-gentrification policies. I mean, all of that good stuff. I think we would have made a great return for our investors, and we would have helped to massage that transition from really difficult neighborhoods to productive neighborhoods without the damage of nonstop gentrification. So that's what my spin out would be, a real estate double bottom line fund that is informed by where the entrepreneurs are starting their companies. Because I think Hunters Point 10 years from now will be a very different place than it is today. The problem is I know nothing about real estate, so I'd have to hire a team. So, well, thank you very much. It's been a real joy to talk to you.